According to this, the video is now live. Alright, so as per the usual intro, we'll get this world to flash into existence rapidly, like there's extreme time dilation while watching a universe come into existence. We'll just flash the video into existence. Like a Big Bang, only so rapid, so much passage of time. A fully formed universe will be right in front of you. Yeah, that's it. That didn't look great. Let's try that again. There, that looked a little bit better. That was better. There, everything flashed into existence better that time. Yeah. Just starting the video by playing peekaboo with the camera because, I don't know. Had to do some sort of intro. And I'm doing this as a live video log. UNIMULTIVERSE live video log, because sometimes I do videos talking about entertainment. And I often title those UNIMULTIVERSE because, could be talking about just about any universe in fiction. And, whatever. You get the drift. And, of course, this is live because I'm not taking the time to organize space on any of the devices that I use for recording. So, just gonna live stream it. And I must say that the image looks awful clear on this end, but due to my poor internet connection, I am sure that this is being broadcast at a particularly lame resolution. Yeah, I'm fairly sure of that. But anyway, So, So no flying cars in the intro, just me playing peekaboo with the camera. Because I can do that. That's low tech. That's as low tech as I can get. That's all the technology I have. Although I can pull off a flying car for the intro, like I do in many of the videos that flash to life with the headlights of a vehicle. Well, might not be able to pull off the flashing headlights, but anyway, here we go. No, wrong way. Yeah, here we go. Yay! It's not a Cavalier though. It's not a Cavalier or a Sunfire. It's a Sunbird. Or possibly a Pontiac J2000. They're not specific on the year. Wait. I don't know. Anyway, there's the flying car intro, as if this hasn't gotten dull and redundant enough. It's not a Cavalier, but at least it's a General Motors J car. Yay, flying car. Yeah. I mean, here's a flying Cadillac. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of morbidly obese cars, but you know what? I'll approve of Cadillacs. Not just because this one's the Ectomobile, but, because they had tail fins. Even the ones in the 80s and early 90s. That's the one thing I liked about Cadillacs. They might be gas-wasting heavy things that are just kind of absurd, but they had the hint of tail fins. I know the 80s Cadillacs wouldn't have what most people call tail fins, but if you look at the tail lights, is it just a little hint that they stick out a bit, just a little bit above the body line? It was like vestigial signs of tail fins. It was like the tail fin evolved away, but there was still just a hint of it. I like those Cadillacs, 80s Cadillacs. Of course, I like the 80s Cadillacs because fuel injected and front wheel drive, most of them anyway, So, but still an absurdly large gas waster, so that does what any other car does, just at more fuel cost. But anyway, I could, here, I'll fly a starship across it this time. Actually, that one's going the wrong way. There we go. Yeah, so this was a pretty cool manual. I'm glad I got this. The Haynes manual for the Starship Enterprise. At first, when I saw, that looks so cool, and I didn't think I'd pick it up, but I looked at it, I saw the Constitution class Enterprise. I like that Enterprise. It's not my favorite. Some aspects of it I like more than the Enterprise D, but I always like the Enterprise D overall a little bit more, and I like both the original Constitution and the Galaxy class Enterprise D more than the movie version of the Constitution, which, although I liked how the movie version of the Constitution had more blue on it, other than that, I didn't like the new shapes of the movie version. Though I did like the new torpedo launchers on it. You know, that kind of looked cool. And the pylons that supported the warp nacelles looked pretty cool. But not the warp nacelles, the lack of deflector dish. It just didn't look as nice, I thought. But, yeah. But main reason why I got this is the NX. It had picked it up, and on the backs there was the NX and the Galaxy class too. There's a Galaxy class, yeah. So that's why I picked this up. It had the NX class and the Galaxy class. You know, my favorite starship, the NX-01, and possibly my second favorite starship, the Galaxy class, in this. So you know what? I had to pick this fucking thing up. You know, a lot of people really like the Excelsior class. I've never understood that. I always thought it was kind of a mixture of a little bit bland, a little bit ugly, kind of cool looking, but compared to other Star Trek ships, kind of lackluster. You know, kind of looked like something out of Star Wars more than Star Trek, which, not an improvement. Not an improvement. Oh, this thing's telling me it has a low battery. That's okay. There we go. There we go. And we'll just ignore that low battery. And are we still operating? Yeah, all right. All right, so the low battery warning is gone, and we're still broadcasting. I have no idea what effect that might have had on the broadcast, but I think it was just a warning on my screen, but I just plugged in the cable that I had. The charging cable. There. So what was I saying? Yeah, Star Trek starships. The NX-01 would be my favorite. Close runner-up would be the Galaxy class. And they were both in that book, so I had to get it. I want to get the Haynes manual for the Klingon Bird of Prey. But I just never got around to getting that. And it had the most appropriate origin for the Klingon cloaking device, but they acquired it from the Romulans, which makes more sense than what they did in Star Trek Discovery. And also, they gave the best description of why a ship can't fire when it's cloaked. Because they gave kind of like the first time they talk about cloaking devices in Star Trek, they gave like this really bullshit theory on why the Romulan ship couldn't fire, because it was first on a Romulan ship, couldn't fire while cloaked, and it was that it was too energy consuming. And it's like, okay, well, why can't it just fire off some missiles? Some sort of self-guiding projectile. It's like with Star Trek 6, the first time anybody ever thought of shooting a torpedo through the cloaking field? Yeah, I don't know. Some people freaked out because the Suliban in Enterprise could cloak. And it's like, no, that's an earlier cloaking technology. It's probably only had it because of the temporal Cold War, so it's probably not a common technology. But, I mean, they could track Suliban ships from their warp trails when they were cloaked. And T'Pol, when they did that, complained that the Enterprise's sensors, at least I think they were cloaked in that scene, most likely they were, that the Enterprise's sensors were incredibly inferior compared to the Vulcan equivalent. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure the Vulcans at the time, if the Suliban disappeared in front of a Vulcan ship, they probably wouldn't really disappear unless somebody was looking out a window. So it's like, yeah, Kirk should still be surprised when the Romulan ship disappeared. Now, what was a little bit of a stretch was the episode of Enterprise where there was one, or was it two ships, Romulan ships, that could cloak. It probably wasn't, it was probably just a slightly enhanced version of the Suliban cloak, because, for reasons that weren't explained, that cloak was obsolete 2 seasons later and not used again. So whatever, but that was a bit of a stretch, but it was only a stretch, but some people freaked out over the Suliban cloak. But it didn't even seem like the same sort of technology as the Romulan cloak. The Suliban cloak, you could still fire while cloaked. It was just one of those things people freaked out over. But Star Trek Discovery, yeah, people freaked out over little things they nitpicked in Star Trek Enterprise, which really were fairly easy to reconcile. Then Star Trek Discovery comes along and gives you a show that's really screwed up. You know, that said, I don't always agree with everybody's complaint about Star Trek Discovery. I just agree that it's really screwed up. For example, some people say the holograms in Star Trek Discovery are way too advanced for something that takes place before Star Trek: The Original Series. To which I say, no, they're just absurd. They're just wrong. They shouldn't have those holograms, but it's not that they're too advanced. I mean, they should have been capable of that before Enterprise. These aren't advanced holograms like the holodeck or the Doctor and Voyager or anything remotely like that. These are semi-transparent holograms that are the result of communication. And yeah, they set up something like that in Deep Space Nine like it was a new and novel thing, but it didn't look like anything that they normally used. So that's probably why they were setting it up. I don't know the benefit of it, and I don't think it should have stuck around. But yeah, like 2 centuries later, or a century later, I should say, not 2 centuries later, a century later in Deep Space Nine, yeah, there was like a scene where they set up some sort of holographic communication system, which didn't look as absurd as what was in Discovery, because the Discovery holograms were just ill-conceived nonsense. I mean, why would you turn around? If you could just turn around and talk to... I said, why would you turn around? I need more caffeine. Need to wake up. If you can just turn around and talk to a view screen, why? Why would you need to have like a hologram in the room? Like, it just seems inconvenient. The technology, personally, by Star Trek standards, I think they should have been capable of that long before Star Trek Enterprise. I just don't think they would ever do it in Star Trek Enterprise, Star Trek The Original Series, Star Trek Next Generation, or for that matter, they shouldn't have done it in Discovery because it's a convoluted, awkward thing. I mean, wouldn't you just want to turn to a view screen and talk to somebody there? I mean, the other person would have to be in some sort of holographic room that's showing them the room that they're experiencing. So that means somebody somewhere, and for some reason it's never the person on the ship, must be in some sort of holographic room. Because with the holograms, they like walk around the ship, they like look at stuff. There was one scene where Sarek was like, the hologram of Sarek was like sitting on a desk, and it's like, he must have... You know, the holograms seem to be perceiving the entire room they're broadcast into. Which just seems incredibly inconvenient. Instead of having an old school telephone booth, they must have a hologram booth for them to go into. And it just seems inconvenient. It just seems not well thought out. It seems like somebody watched Star Wars and thought, you know what? They did a recording of somebody as a holographic image. There they're communicating with a holographic image. Hey, let's try that. I know, we'll do it even better. We'll have our holograms walk around the room, and somebody in the writing room might have said, well, you know, if they're walking around the room, like they're perceiving the whole room, you know, what sort of booth are they transmitting this from? You're fired! That's probably how it went down, you know. They wanted to do something stupid. And if there was anybody in the writer's room that pointed out that they were doing something stupid, they were probably fired. They were probably shit canned pretty fucking fast. Yeah, Star Trek Discovery doesn't have very good quality control, but I don't have a problem with the holograms as being too advanced. I have a problem with them just being too convoluted. I think they should have been capable of holograms like that in the time period of Enterprise. We know they were capable of holograms of a similar quality and technology, you know, like semi-transparent holograms that were just broadcast from emitters that you don't really see by the time of Star Trek 3, but they probably could do it long before that, because I think they're in a bar in Star Trek 3, and you can see like somebody playing a holographic video game, which, yeah, it's not as sophisticated as the holograms in Discovery. Brain doesn't even want to load the name Star Trek Discovery. Not as sophisticated as that, but it's not supposed to be. It's just a little game that they're playing in a bar. But just straight up, it's like when people say that was too advanced, I'm like, no. Let's not argue over something. that could be, let's not argue over the canonical value of something being too advanced or not advanced enough when, in the future, a future Star Trek show could get things right and somewhere have a similar holographic technology and be just fine, just fair. It's not, the problem isn't that it's too advanced. It's too convoluted. Now, what I did think was too advanced, that was kind of convoluted to shoehorn into the timeline, was the overusage of force fields. Like, ship of the line, top of the line for its time period, the motherfucking Constitution class starship. 10 years later, it would still be decompressing its shuttle bay to let the shuttles come and go. You open the shuttle bay door, the air just out into the vacuum of space. Well, maybe not. They might have sucked the air out of the room before they opened the shuttle bay door, probably. But they had to decompress and repressurize the shuttle bay when they launched and received shuttles. Unless there was something wrong with the force field on the day that they referenced that. That was the Constitution class starship had to do that. The NX class starship had to do that, but no surprise, the NX class starship was a long time before the Constitution class, But you don't have to do that on the Crossfield class, and I don't remember. I don't think they ever showed whether or not the Senshu class could. But the Senshu class, they got all these holes punched into it during a fight, and the force fields kicked in and held in the atmosphere. And I actually like the Senshu class. I hate the Crossfield class. That's the actual Discovery. It looks like something Star Wars barfed out. It's worse than the Excelsior class. It looks like a mix mash of awkward shapes that they would use to design a Star Wars ships out of. And they just kind of stuck, a saucer section and a secondary section and warp nacelle shaped things together to make it kind of like a Star Trek shaped ship. But it looks like it's a starship. It looks like it's a Star Trek ship build out of trash from the Star Wars universe. I'm not a fan of the Crossfield class starship, which is the Starship Discovery. The Senshu class, no, it's the Senshu. Senshu, I forget how it's pronounced. The Walker class, which was the Senshu. Senshu? I don't even remember. The starship that they focused on the first 2 episodes. One, it looks all bolted together and crude and primitive. Definitely less advanced than the Constitution class, as it's supposed to be. It actually looks less advanced than the NX class, as it has more jaggedy things. It looks like it's more bolted together crudely. It looks like with the NX class, there was a hint that you might have to go out on the outside of the ship to repair stuff, because they weren't advanced enough to fit everything in place, that you could fix everything inside the hull. If something was damaged in the wrong place, you might have to put on an EVA suit and go out and start fixing stuff, Because, space management and relative advancements, and some stuff would probably need to be more to the outside of the ship, especially if it was something that was feeding power to the certain things on the hull, like maybe the polarized hull plating. That kind of made sense because it was less advanced in the Constitution class, which could be smooth and more constructed, smooth. But the Walker class, I thought it looked even more primitive than the NX class. But that's okay. I mean, just looking primitive doesn't make it more primitive. It would be newer than the NX class, but definitely a lot older than the Constitution class. And, I'm actually fine with its overall design. I thought it was a pretty cool design. It's kind of like the efficient design that you would need for something like the NX class or the Akara class. Something that's built to get the best out of your engines. It's got, the saucer section, and it's got the warp nacelles positioned relative to them, in a way that, it's basically a big saucer with warp nacelles and propped up kind of similar. But the Senshu class, I guess, is actually supposed to be pretty big. So it was probably designed to do a lot of things and probably had a lot of resources put into building it at the time, which explains why a captain that's supposedly so well decorated and beloved by Starfleet would be commanding a really, really old starship. Unless she was commanding it for a really, really long time and didn't want to get promoted to a different ship. I suppose that could be it too. But it probably was, in its time, the biggest ship that could do the most and have the most stuff going on in it. And then as it became outdated, because it was such a big ship, still valued, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, my point I was going to make about that ship, the thing that I actually have a problem with that seems to advance, is they got holes punched in it, the force fields came online and held in the atmosphere. But I'm pretty sure the Constitution-class starship, if that happened, emergency bulkheads would seal off the areas next to the hull breach, and they didn't have, like, that sophisticated of force fields to pop into place everywhere in the ship to hold in the atmosphere. And if you watch the episode, because I actually rewatched the episode just to see, because I thought, well, you know what? The brig, original series era brigs, always had kind of like a force field to hold in the prisoners. Maybe the reason why the atmosphere was held in place was just because of the brig. The part that you see, the part that was shown during this incident was the brig. One of the characters was in the brig, because the character proved themselves to be so stupid, it's going to be hard for the character to ever redeem themselves in the eyes of the audience. Any sane members of the audience is going to think that character's a fucking idiot. But anyway, the character is in the brig, and, the ship blows up around her, and she survives because she's protected by the force field in the brig. But the rest of the ship, the shield... at first I thought it might have just been the brig, because there would be a force field there, and maybe that could hold in the atmosphere. But then you can see that other parts of the ship are protected by a force field. So is this like one of the first ships to get equipped with that sort of thing? Is this a new experimental thing that for some reason in the next couple decades they aren't going to put in the ship of the line, top of the line Constitution class starships? Yes, the Constitution class starship is already out exploring space at this point in time. They've already... Let's see, this is 10 years before the original series, so the Constitution-class starships should have been probably a little bit more than 5 years old at this point, but they'd be like the ship of the line. They're supposed to be the top-of-the-line starship for the time, or at least one of them, if they decide to canonically change that. And it doesn't have that technology. I mean... to me, that's the problem with Discovery, is when they designed it, they did stuff like that. Like, they gave it next generation technology, like Star Trek the Next Generation technology, before the original series. And people always point out the holograms. It's like, no, the holograms aren't the problem. The holograms, well, not from the perspective of being too advanced. The holograms are the problem from the perspective of being too stupid, of being too advanced, stupidly advanced for the time in the story that it's supposed to be represented. That'd be the force fields, and people just kind of ignore that one. People, but they complain about the holograms, and I think, well, no, they should have been able to do that before Enterprise. Those holograms aren't really that advanced; they're just convoluted. But anyway, I'm rambling on about nitpicking Star Trek Discovery. Which is easy. It's easy to nitpick Star Trek Discovery because it's kind of fucked up. It's kind of fucked up. You have Klingons that aren't Klingons. You have the subspace, extra-dimensional space capable of being used for faster than light travel. Apparently has a fungal infection. Oh, fuck. All kinds of absurd things in Star Trek Discovery, and I could complain about that all day long, because you might as well have fun complaining about something if it's not going to be entertaining. I mean, Star Trek Enterprise to this day is still my favorite television show. And it got me right back into Star Trek at a time where I had loved The Next Generation, and I had been slowly coming to love Deep Space Nine as much as The Next Generation. But the last season of Deep Space Nine was just bloody fucking depressing. I loved the new Dax, but hated the new storytelling. Like, it's like every episode had this feeling of, well, the show's already over, might as well be depressing. And it's kind of like, when they first started the Klingon War story arc, it's like, that was actually kind of cool. But I found like they didn't really write the Klingons very well, which I blame Ronald D. Moore for that. I'm not a fan of his writing. People like brag him up, but he was behind that incredibly stupid Battlestar Galactica show where every character was so unpleasant, it was almost like watching an episode of Lost or Alias. Like, Ronald D. Moore, J.J. Abrams, I'm not a fan of their work overall. But on the other hand, Deep Space Nine had Robert Hewlett Wolf and Ira Stephen Bear, which I think they were a lot of the awesome in Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine, more than any other show, with the exception of Discovery, but it's hard to count Discovery. Discovery's just too off to the side. More than any other show, I think Deep Space Nine violated the spirit of Star Trek while still offering awesome stories, which, and a lot of people say, but it had this wonderful, uplifting concepts, and it did, but, it's kind of like, if you think of the spirit of Star Trek as what was intended by Gene Roddenberry, you have to stop and think that some stuff, while canonical and good, also pushed to the limit of where Star Trek was supposed to go, and by Gene Roddenberry's standards would have already went over it. It might not be a surprise to say that Gene Roddenberry did not approve of Star Trek V, but when he was still alive, he didn't approve of Star Trek VI, which largely had to do with how Starfleet, humans of the future, and Vulcans of the future were acting in relation to the Klingons, that they would get involved with that conspiracy, and he didn't like how the character, what was her name, blah, 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 the one that kind of reminds you of Saavik, but she's not Saavik, and I can't remember her name because I'm horrible with names, even fictional fictional characters that I've watched over and over and over and over and over again for decades. I can't remember her name at the moment. File not found at the moment, but if you remember her, like, he didn't like how she was written. There was supposedly an argument between Roddenberry and the guy who handled most of the Star Trek movies from 2 right up till 6. Him saying, well, I wrote the character, I created the character, I know how she should act, sort of thing. But Roddenberry just, what was against Star Trek 6? And Star Trek 6 was a great movie, but it kind of pushed the limits in some ways, even though it has a great Star Trek-style uplifting spirit of learning to overcome differences. Its characters kind of pushed things in a direction Roddenberry wouldn't be happy with. And if you listen to Roddenberry's philosophy on what's canonical, he didn't really care about things being retconned. I mean, he retconned a lot of the original series, just totally changed, like, backstory. With the first episode of The Next Generation, a lot of stuff that was established in the original series just got kind of, had the hell retconned right out of it. Right in the first episode of Next Generation, he had no problem with retconning, and he said that his official version of the future he didn't think should be absolute. He welcomed other people changing it, but he did have problems with how characters were portrayed and how characters acted, and whether or not they lived up to his philosophy. His main thing was the philosophy of the characters of the future. Deep Space Nine, I felt, kind of pushed the limits, but in certain areas of not being the Roddenberry future, but at the same time still being a great show. Just as Star Trek VI did that as well. And I say that based on the fact that in the case of Star Trek VI, we actually know what he disapproved of in the movie. Star Trek V, it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, Star Trek V was a convoluted mess, but if you hold Star Trek V up to Star Trek Discovery, or if you hold Star Trek V up to Star Trek 2009, Star Trek the movie. We already had Star Trek the motion picture. Then in 2009 we get Star Trek the movie, or just Star Trek. I couldn't even. They were too lazy to even give it a fucking subtitle. Star Trek the motion picture made sense. It made sense to call it that. It was the motion picture. Previously it was a TV series. Now we were getting a movie. Star Trek just titled Star Trek as a movie, so it's kind of like Star Trek the movie, you know. It's like, well, there was already 10 Star Trek movies before it. And you couldn't even give it a subtitle. Or a number or anything. Well, numbering had already gone out the window, and numbering wouldn't be appropriate for a parallel universe prequel, but there's some sort of subtitle. Whatever. Yeah, so that's Star Trek. And I rambled on about Star Trek, but I was actually thinking about talking about the Orville. I actually did a video, recorded a video. It was audio on only, so I could do it quickly. Then I never got around editing it, commenting on not the most recent episode of the Orville that I watched last night, but the one from a week before that I watched, as well as the episode, or the short trek that was on opposite it. Because one was on the Space Channel, the other one was on Fox. And I caught them both, quickly did a video, and despite the fact I did it just so quick that I didn't even set up the camera, just recorded audio, I never got around to editing it. Just never did it. But so in the off chance I do get around to editing that, there's not a lot of point in me talking about the last episode, a whole lot about it. The episode before the one that was just on now, other than I thought it was a good episode. I thought all the episodes of the Orville this season were good. They were all good. They're all great. Yeah. The best one was the one that was just on last night. The one before it, I could think of some positives and some negatives. The only real significant negative is the negative that haunts me to this day from the episode I saw over a week ago that just seemed like the absurd out of place thing, was when one of the characters commented on having dated a two-headed alien, and each head didn't know about the other. And I'm like, okay, one, if that was supposed to be a gag, it wasn't very funny. It was like a failed Futurama gag. You know, Futurama did a lot of silly stuff, but usually, even if it was silly, it was still interesting enough, like, that, at least with the first 4 seasons of Futurama, if something was silly enough that it was a little bit world-breaking, it still kind of worked. It still kind of had that balance. It was funny enough to be worth it, to making the world a little less sensible, you know. It was usually worth it. It wasn't really funny if it was meant to be a joke, and if it was supposed to be a world-building moment, it was a little bit convoluted, and, you know, it's like, that one little line kind of, you know, stuck with me, and it's like, the Orville, you know, and despite the fact that silliness, usually it doesn't have moments that do that. It doesn't have moments that have that sort of effect on me, where I'm thinking, you know what, the humor in that, or whatever they're intended, harmed the world-building aspects of what they're doing, like creating a fictional world that's interesting. You know, basically I'm saying that it just seemed absurd, and it didn't seem to serve a purpose. I mean, the character could have been bullshitting the other guy, which also kind of hurts the scene, because otherwise it seemed like it was supposed to be a somewhat sincere scene, you know. So that's the one thing I can complain about. And I don't think I complained about it in the other video very much, so, you know, whatever. So, yeah. But other than that, you know, I'm going to avoid talking about that episode, which was a good episode. As usual, there was, like, a moment where they put the ship in danger, which felt unnecessary. They did that a lot in Star Trek. Excuse me. Sometimes they'd have an interesting story. Then somewhere near the end, they'd put the ship in danger. And it's like, that was unnecessary. That was just unnecessary. And I felt like they did that in the Orville as well, too. Where they'll have a scene where the story was interesting, and then at the moment there's going to be something that puts the ship in danger, and it just feels unnecessary. Of course, a lot of people involved with Star Trek, including Brannon Braga. Is that how you pronounce his name? Brannon Braga? Yeah, I guess that's how you pronounce it. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. I usually see it written. I don't hear it spoken out loud that often. But he was involved with Star Trek since Star Trek The Next Generation, a co-creator of Star Trek Enterprise, and so I like his work then, because Star Trek Enterprise is, to this day, still my favorite television show, and he's heavily involved with the Orville. But a lot of other people that were involved with Star Trek are involved with the Orville. So some of the little tropes that I could have done without in Star Trek, I see them in the Orville, but they're not bad. They're it's just a slight downside. But the story last night, which I thought was the best of them, the two before them were character driven without much action, and that's good. You don't want every episode to be action based, or else you just don't have much substance. That said, this episode actually, when you get right down to it, didn't really have a lot of action either. You had some interesting starship scenes with the shuttlecraft going through the atmosphere of a planet. And there was some conflict at the end of it, but it wasn't even like Starship Battles conflict. But it was probably not only the best episode of the season thus far, I'd say the best episode they've done. And they went to the heavy gravity world that Alara is from, and it was a great story involving her character. They brought back Robert Picardo's character, and everything Robert Picardo is in turns out awesome. Well, maybe not. But, I mean, in Voyager, how interesting were the characters in Voyager overall? Seven had some pretty cool lines, the best moments for Chakotay, though, is if Janeway happened to screw up. The overall relationship between Tom Paris, B'Elanna Torres, and Harry Kim, like those characters felt kind of natural and interesting characters. But overall, Voyager didn't have, like, a lot of really strong moments, despite having some actually pretty good characters. But the Doctor was one of the outstanding characters in the show. And Robert Picardo pulled off the Doctor excellent. He was just made that hologram interesting. At least probably a lot of his personality oozing through is why the character was so great. Or maybe it wasn't good writing on their part. But Robert Picardo as the Doctor in Voyager... he also played a character in Stargate, which started out as an antagonistic character that you think you're going to dislike. And from his first appearance in Stargate SG-1, right to when he was a major character at the end of Stargate Atlantis. I mean, the way they put that character to use, the writers probably played a big role in it, but also the actor who pulled the character off with a likable charisma right from back when he was an antagonist, supposed to be, a displeasing by the books bookworm character that disagreed with the protagonists. From that moment right to the end, it just came through as having a lot of personality that made him interesting. And even though it was a character that wasn't supposed to have a lot of personality, he was interestingly boring. He was a likable character, and I don't know how much of that was Robert Picardo or the writers, but it came through well. And of course, putting Robert Picardo in the Orville, a great choice having him as a character, especially a character that isn't known for liking humans. Called humans the hillbillies of the galaxy in a previous episode. And then, of all things, John Bings... I forget how you pronounce his name. The guy that played Dr. Phlox on Enterprise. When he showed up, which was awesome too. The only thing disappointing about it is when they had the guy who played Dr. Phlox alongside the guy that played the Doctor in Voyager. The Enterprise character, the Voyager character, Voyager actor and Star Trek Enterprise actor, both of them. The only thing that was disappointing to me about that, because they both played excellent Zalians? How we pronounce your name? How we pronounce the species name? They were excellent characters. The only thing that disappointed me about that, though, is that when the guy that was played, the one that was played by the same guy that played Dr. Phlox, the thing that disappointed me about that is he turned out to be an antagonist, and it was kind of like somebody. Just a second. There's noises. I hear noises all day. Must be the neighbors. Like something went thump. It might be across the road. What are you cats jumping off something? Sound like it was out something. No, there's nothing. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, the disappointing thing was by making him an antagonist, it kind of limited how you can bring him back. You know, it's kind of like it was. Once I saw those two characters, it's like I want more of these characters. And what was a great story, and the guy who played Dr. Phlox made an excellent bad guy. It's kind of like it would have been great if he had been a protagonist and there was some reason to bring him back again. You know, just because I wanted to see more of that character. That's the only complaint I have. It's like, well, this was great, but they wasted him on an antagonist when they could have made him a protagonist and then brought him back more. That said, if he's only going to appear once, damn good antagonist. And he was kind of like, I'm not even going to get into the. It's not that I want to avoid spoilers. If you're watching one of my videos, consider it a spoiler warning just by being one of my videos. But yeah, not really a whole lot of reason to go into all the details of the plot, but it was just good. And I probably should have thought out a review of it even more than that if I'm just going to comment on how good it was, but that was actually just great. And it was a great character moments for Alora, if I pronounced her name correctly. It was an all-around great episode. I thought it might have been the best episode of the series so far. Now, and they had some strong episodes in season 1. Now, I would say one thing. If I was disappointed about one thing, about wishing one of the characters hadn't turned out to be an antagonist, just so we'd see more of them. Other than that, one other thing I was disappointed with, they went to the Zelayan homeworld, and I was kind of hoping that while they were there, they'd have like some sort of excuse to do like backstory on the planet. Like, I mean, they describe the planet pretty well, and you get a good vibe for the species itself, but it's kind of like I want to see them go into hints as to the formation of the Planetary Union, because it's kind of like the Federation in Star Trek, but you have the Vulcans who are out in space for like 1,500 years. They were warp capable for about 1,500 years before humans were. And in the latter half of that, Andorians and Tellarites had become warp capable, which is kind of interesting too. But you have the Vulcans as the most advanced old species. I'm just wondering, you know, if in the Orville, if they're going to come up with some sort of like backstory for, you know, who first became faster than light capable in that world, and how the species came together and met. You know, like I'm kind of interested in the world building, and the Zelayans are also something that I find interesting in the world. You know, they have pointed ears like the Vulcans, except different than the Vulcans. Their name is Zelayan, spelled with an X, so maybe it's supposed to sound more Z-like, Zelayan. Although sometimes it sounds like they're saying Salayan, with an S, the way it's pronounced. It's hard to tell, like the way it was pronounced in the show, I thought. But it's spelled with an X. So, Salayan? It should be Zelayan, I guess. But the name is obviously inspired by Mount Salaya from Vulcan. You know, they're Vulcan-like. And although they have aspects of the planet that cause them to evolve to be stronger than your average humanoid, like the Vulcans evolved stronger than the average humanoid, in their case, it's just the gravity of the planet that plays the biggest role in that. Which was also kind of interesting. But what I think would be interesting is if they established that Earth and Zelaya were like 16 light years apart or something like that, which would kind of make Zelaya the alternate universe version of Vulcan, because Earth and Vulcan should be about 16 light years apart, because there's a real star at that position, which is generally what it appears as though Vulcan is. You know. Anyway. Yeah. I'm just having some Rockstar Pure Zero. I'm not sure what a Pure Zero is, but Pure Zero, that zero tastes an awful lot like watermelon. Yeah, it was a lame joke. So, wow, I really should have scripted this out or thought this through more before I just rambled on about it. But that was a great episode. I want to see them do more world building on the background of Zalea and the Mocklin homeworld. I forget, it has a different name. It's not like Mocklin Prime or something like that. I forget the name of the Mocklin homeworld. But the Mocklins, I think they should do more on the backstory of them. That's something I want to see more of as well. I want to see more backstory. I want to see more world building in the Orville because it's a great show. And the Orville, it's an interesting ship. They established it as a mid-range. Now, I haven't seen them describe this in dialogue, though I could be forgetting about a scene. I remember I saw somebody describe the Orville as what the Enterprise D should have been. And I'm like, not really. The Enterprise D is definitely a better ship, both functionally, and I think they were wanting to talk about it like a military asset, as opposed to just being a straight-up starship. But there's like a design flaw in the Orville that I can see. They have like plasma torpedoes, but they also have the plasma cannons, and the plasma cannons are like a more precise weapon. But if I follow everything I've seen of the ship, I don't know, maybe I'm forgetting something, but it seemed like the only places on the ship that fire plasma cannons gives them a significant blind spot. Like, they can fire under the ship, but not above the ship, and it's like, considering it's supposed to be their most precise weapon, more precise than the plasma torpedoes, even though the plasma torpedoes have more power. Now, it's kind of like, it's a more flawed ship than the Enterprise D, because when I heard it described that way, it was somebody that's focusing on it as a military asset, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, no, the Enterprise D has like more science labs and more things that can help the development and growth of the Federation and stuff like that. But if you're thinking about it from the aspect of a military asset, it's like, no, the Enterprise D has a firing arc that surrounds the ship perfectly in all directions. So, I don't know. But then again, that could totally change if you see the Orville firing plasma cannons from the top of the ship. That would totally solve that problem. Maybe it can. It's like the NX-01 had plasma cannon turrets all around the ship, so it could blow up an asteroid coming towards it in any direction, or fend off a pirate. You know, it could have been Nausicaan pirates coming at it from any direction. You know. But then when they equipped the phase cannons, they're only planning to put 3 on the ship. Probably because it was a more powerful weapon, but they didn't think they'd need that many of it, so they could probably get into a specific position or angle if they were going for the more high-yield shot. But then not realizing what they're going to be up against, it appeared as though they ended up putting every weapon port ended up being a phase cannon port. But the shuttlecraft apparently kept the plasma weapons. Although I thought there was like a line in one episode where they upgraded one of the shuttlecraft with phase weapons, but I could be wrong about that. But I know in the 4th season, the shuttlecraft were established, at least one of the shuttles were still, shuttle pods were still established to have plasma weapons. I don't know. Just comparing Star Trek and the Orville, which is fun. It's just natural. A lot of the creative team behind Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager, and Star Trek Enterprise are working on the Orville, and that's just great. Deep Space Nine had some crossover with the people that worked on Voyager and The Next Generation, but they were a somewhat different group. They were same oversight at the top, a lot of crossover in between, but for the most part, there was a fair bit of independence. And Deep Space Nine was an excellent show. As was Next Generation and Enterprise. And Voyager was, it's often referred to as the weakest of them, and I agree, and even with that, it feels a bit overrated. It was very network generic, kind of, but it had its good moments. But anyway, I'm rambling on about the Orville now. But yeah, the most recent episode I felt was the best of them. Had some great world building just by showing more of the Zaleans. And they had a pretty good some pretty good character development and character storytelling in it. And it actually felt like a more action-packed episode than the last few, but there wasn't any like spaceship combat or anything really like that. In fact, there wasn't really much other than a family getting held hostage by somebody who's gone nuts with grief over the death of their son. Excuse me. And then somebody getting shot when they're wearing a special gravity field altered spacesuit, and trying to get them, managing to get them back on the shuttle before the gravity crushes them. You know, I do have a problem with some of the, I'd say the sci-fi of the planet Zalea, because, okay, I mean, if it has that much gravity, it should have like heavy atmospheric pressure, and the shuttlecraft, well, the gravity field of it, I suppose, could also be a field that would hold out air pressure. Yeah, the air pressure seemed about standard on that planet. It was just the gravity itself that crushed things. That's the way it seemed. But Zalayan here must be made out of something really light that doesn't just drift around all over the place in normal gravity, because they weren't all like, everything wasn't like pinned to the ground and just their strong bones and muscle structure allowing them to stand upright. You know, like most things on the planet just look natural. Even things that appeared to be lightweight and, you know, and whatever. Which, okay, you could say that it evolved differently, made of a different structure than what it looks like. But, oh, large vehicle going past. Just the noise. Anyway, like little things like that, okay, fine. But, it's just, it showed like somebody, you know, being potentially hurt or killed by the gravity, a normal human, they kind of established. And they threw, and you know what, if I was on the planet too, I'd want to see this happen too. They showed like somebody threw a bottle out of the gravity field, which it looked like it might have been a metal bottle, but it could have been just a metallic appearing plastic, and, you know, dropped to the ground and flattened. And it's kind of like, to me, it's like, okay, if the gravity is that strong outside of the protective gravity field of the shuttlecraft, okay, fine, but it's still like, just when you look at the characters and aspects on their body, their hair, their clothing, like things like that aren't being affected by the gravity in the same way that possibly metal, possibly plastic bottle was. Because it just kind of collapsed and crushed like flat, like somebody had rolled over the bottle with a steamroller. And it's like, if the gravity's that extreme, like some of the stuff that seemed normal up on the ship, like the character's hair and clothing, you'd think there'd be like some effect on the planet, even if such things were meant to hold up under the. I'm not saying it should have ripped the clothing off of them or anything like that, but. You know, like things wouldn't wrinkle the same way. You know, you'd have like something like constantly pulling on it. I mean, because you're talking about things would just want to wrinkle and flex the same way. You know, covering your body like clothing and hair, because I mean it crushed the fucking bottle. You know, if somebody can walk around in the atmosphere and their hair flows normal in normal gravity, and then they're on this planet and it stays the same, it's like. But that's a force that crushed the bottle. Like, that's me nitpicking one of the details, but that was a very noticeable detail to me, you know. If you're going to picture, you know, the actual world that they're portraying, that's something that I'm going to notice. You know, it's noticeable. So that's another thought I had. So yeah, I mean, I think they should downplay in the future, just to make it more realistic. I'd prefer it if they downplayed the extreme gravity, you know, of the planet. Like, it should be extreme gravity because of what they established, but to be that extreme, it's like the more extreme the gravity gets, the harder it is to explain away certain things, like I just commented on. Yeah, but whatever. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is I got the Art Asylum phase pistol here is when you look at like some of the technical stuff of the Orville, is the plasma guns in the Orville seem kind of similar, because they got like this almost like protective armor over this part here, and they got it's kind of pistol like shaped like that, And I don't know, I thought the plasma guns in the Orville kind of reminded me of the phase pistols in Star Trek Enterprise, but a little bit different. I keep hearing noises. I don't think anybody's come to... No, just another distraction. I don't know, one of the neighbors, must be vehicles coming and going from there. I don't know. But sometimes I'll hear, like, next door, if there's a slightly louder than average car, it'll sound closer. But, yeah, so anyway, that's just my rambling and ranting on about the Orville and Star Trek. And Star Trek Discovery sucks, yeah. But, whatever. Yeah, Star Trek Discovery makes Voyager look perfect by comparison. But Star Trek Discovery had some strong points. I actually like that they inserted a little bit of cursing into it. Because, you know, real human language should survive into the future. Should. Nudity was also a nice feature. There was, like, Klingon nipples, an Orion that you couldn't really see her genitals, but her ass was completely uncovered. And you couldn't really see her genitals, so even though there was something transparent in front of it, I think there was just enough dangling. You could, maybe on the Blu-ray you could have seen it. I have the DVD. I picked up the DVD, and you know, but there was some Orion penis in it. At first, I wasn't sure. It was kind of hard to tell because back in the distance, you know, but he like flops around, and the way he flopped, I wasn't sure if it was actually his penis or if he had like a loincloth over, because it just looked kind of awkward the way it flopped and the resolution it was in. But no, there was Orion penis in there, Klingon nipples, and a lot of Orion ass, because the woman that had, like, the Orion woman who had, like, the dangly thing just barely covering her genitals, which weren't really, if the angle was just a bit different, you probably could have made out something, or if the resolution was a bit higher. Maybe on the Blu-ray, you know, her genitals would have been seen too. But when she was back on, definitely uncovered ass. And on the Orion, who you see his penis later on, his ass was completely uncovered when he was wearing a jockstrap style thong and he was bent over in one scene. So a lot of Orion nudity, which, hey, cool. And Klingon nudity, which, well, it's the Klingorks, so should have been real Klingons. Although you don't actually see it, you discover that either the Klingons have two penises or possibly two urine emitters on their penis, you know. One or the other. Considering there was a line earlier in the season about the extra organs, I'm going to guess that it's two penises, which they really need to retcon. In the past, it seemed as though Klingons were just your standard humanoid form, which, you know, kind of made you assume, you know, that be the same as humans and Vulcans and whatever, but, whatever. But Discovery gave us cursing and nudity, which is about all it gave us. The Walker-class starship's actually kind of cool, but the Crossfield-class starship that you see the most really sucks. And the Spore Drive is absurd. But then again, maybe some of the higher beings, like the Q and the Orions, and not the Orions, the Organians, that's the word that I was supposed to love. The Organians and the Q and whatever. Perhaps they evolved from the magical subspace realm fungus rather than evolving from organic life. I don't know. I was going to comment on SEGA Heroes while I was rambling on about things. I was going to comment on SEGA Heroes because that was a video game that I downloaded on my phone, and I actually ended up playing a fair bit, yeah, SEGA Heroes, yeah, whatever. And my thoughts on it is it's pretty fun, except for how much of a ripoff it is. When I first got it, they had, it seemed as though it was just a recent addition to the game. They just added Phantasy Star characters. So, of course, Phantasy Star, gotta play some Phantasy Star characters. And I quickly discovered that like they wanted you to unlock the characters, and you could either earn a bunch of gems to purchase like a special bundle, or there was other ways you could do it. But either it would take you an absurdly long time to unlock a lot of the stuff, or an absurdly large amount of money. And it's like, what the hell? And I thought to myself, I wanted to unlock the character Wern from Phantasy Star 4. It was easy to unlock Rolf from Phantasy Star 2. I wanted to unlock Wern. And I discovered that, I thought to myself, well, you know what? I put some quarters in an arcade machine. There's been some inflation since then. All right, I'm willing to dump a couple dollars in this to unlock a character. And then I discovered that the money I wasted on it just bought me fragments of a character, and it's like, okay, that was borderline worthless. I'd probably have to spend $10, $20, or $30 just to unlock the fucking character by the way this looks. And that's basically the way the game itself has gone. The most recent thing I discovered, they unlocked it. There was a character from Crazy Taxi that wasn't going to require too absurdly large number of gems to unlock, Gus. Then they have him as they label him as a rare character, but not one of the epic or legendary ones that are harder to unlock. So I thought to myself, all right, they also have a special... Oh, cat sneezing. Cat sneezed. Have you also been getting cat fur in your sinuses? Anyway, there's been a cat sneezing. So anyway, if you manage to unlock Gus, it's like, all right, work real hard, get some gems, unlock Gus. You dump a little bit of money into whatever you want to do to unlock Gus. It's not going to be worth your bother if the reason why you want to unlock Gus is they have a special event. If you have Gus unlocked, you can take him and other characters into an event that'll unlock mega tokens that'll help you unlock other characters. And if you look at it, it's like, okay, if I could go through this event, I just need Gus. And then if I get Gus unlocked, I can go through this, and then I'll unlock tokens that'll help me unlock other characters that are really hard to unlock. And it's like, then you unlock Gus, you get him, you go in there, and then you discover, oh wait, after you get to this certain point, you need characters that are a certain star rank, so I'm going to have to work really hard or dump an absurd amount of money into the game to make Gus a high enough level that because all the characters you take, each time you have to take Gus, and Gus has to reach a certain star level. So it's like this game would be incredibly fun. This game would actually be really fun if it wasn't you had to go through so many hoops and so much shit just to unlock characters. And they seem to have done that to make you want to pay money to unlock stuff. Because you pay some money, you can buy some gems, which you can use to purchase other things that can help you unlock characters and so forth. Which, you know what, that might be a good business model if you actually got something from it, but I'd never recommend anybody do that. Even if you're somebody that's okay with dumping money into downloadable content and shit like that, they'd be better off making money off of ads. Because that's a horrible business model. Because if you try it once or twice, you're going to realize you ain't getting shit for what you pay for. So, if you dumped a couple dollars into it and you realize you get fuck all, then you look at it and you think, all right, well, wait a second. I would have had to dump how much into this game to unlock a character? That's just fucking stupid. So, the game itself is basically... The whole game is just you looking at it and thinking, oh, what would be fun to do now? All right, I can do a little bit of that, and then I'm going to be out of energy to do this or that. And if I focus on unlocking interesting characters that I might want, like Tails the Fox or Alice from Phantasy Star, it's like, oh shit, that's going to be a lot of work. They made the game so the whole thing is you just looking at it thinking, this would be fun if, but you can't. That's the whole thing. And I would have gotten completely bored with it. For example, I like Nintendo characters, but if you had to go through as much effort to unlock Luigi as what you have to go through to unlock Tails the Fox, I would have been bored with it. If instead of Alice from Phantasy Star it was Link, I'd be like, fuck that. I don't care about unlocking that character. And I would have gotten bored with playing with Mario and Kirby, Mario, Kirby, Donkey Kong, whatever. I like those characters, but I would have been completely bored and apathetic with the game if it had been Nintendo characters, because I don't like the Nintendo characters as much as the Sega characters. The game has Sonic the Hedgehog and Phantasy Star to keep me interested in it, and a lot of cool stuff. A lot of cool stuff it's a lot of stuff I consider on par with Mario and Zelda games and stuff like that, such as Crazy Taxi, Jet Set Radio. Oh, Jet Set Radio is awesome. The Jet Set Radio characters are in there. Golden Axe, Shinobi, Streets of Rage. A lot of characters from great games in it. But what you got to go through to put them to any use and to unlock more characters and to proceed in the game is absurd. But that said, because I really like those characters, especially Phantasy Star and Sonic the Hedgehog, and I like the other characters as well, but Phantasy Star and Sonic the Hedgehog just bring it enough to keep me interested in it, and I'll keep going back and seeing, alright, is there another chest unlocked that I can unlock a few fragments of this or that, it's like, but for the most part, this game, if you're not really, really, really into Sega characters, it's not even worth looking at. And at first I thought this game is great when I first started playing it. Then I realized you reach a certain point where it's like it becomes useless. It's like it's designed, like if you're not really into Sega characters, you're gonna think, oh, this is a fun introduction to Sega characters. Then you reach a certain point where the levels are a little bit harder, and it's like, well, it's going to take me forever to get my characters powerful enough just to move on to the next zone. Well, it'll take a while. And hey, I'd love to unlock this character that looks interesting, that's potentially unlockable. But that's going to take a lot of work and effort and time. And it's an absurd task in making you either spend a lot of time playing to unlock things or paying to unlock things. And that said, I understand the business model of wanting people to pay for online content because it's how a lot of mobile game developers make money now. But if you don't get anything for it the first time you try it, you're not going to be tempted to try it again. And if you look at it carefully, you'd be dumping a shit ton of money into the fucker just to get a little bit of use out of it. So, unless you really, really love Sega characters, the game sucks. That's my thought on Sega Heroes. That said, if you really like Sega characters, and you don't mind taking like an absurd amount of time, like months, to unlock the characters you want to unlock and to get any distance in it, it seems to have a great concept of how it merged all those Sega characters into a game and it's one of those simple move the gems around to have various effects, and it makes the manifest in how the characters fight, which really, if you're going to do something on a cell phone, that's probably about the best way to go, because touch screens are just perfect for that. I'd love to see the concept with entirely different controls made into an actual console game where you're not just moving around little colored gems to represent moves and abilities and powers and whatever. If they could make it into a turn-based console role-playing game of some sort, I think that'd be great. But if you're gonna have to go through what you have to go through in this to unlock stuff, and if you could just level grind. You can't even level grind because you only have so much energy to use going through the campaigns, and then you'd have to spend gems to get more or wait quite a while to get more. And then you have like campaigns or bonus missions on the side you can do that you don't need that energy for, but you can only do so much with those. You often have to be a certain level or have so many stars behind your character, which you unlock with more fragments of the characters, and you have to unlock stuff just to do anything with those other levels. And so once you start playing those other levels, you've basically used them all up, and you gotta hope that something interesting will be unlocked the next day to make it worth playing the next day. And it's basically a potentially great game that is weighed down in how it made itself convoluted It made itself convoluted. I think it's an attempt to get people to throw money at it. But when I look at it, it's like, well, if somebody throws money at it, they're not going to get much out of that. I mean, let's just say I actually wanted to use some of the characters in here that are hard to unlock. I think I was like looking at it and thinking, well, you know, if I dumped like $50 into the game, I could unlock like a few characters, and once I've done that, I'd still have to level them up. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. But when you first start playing it, and it seems like there's going to be all this stuff to unlock, and you start unlocking some of the stuff that's easy to unlock, some people might think it's an attempt to get you hooked. Personally, I think it's just going to get people bored, because they're going to be like, oh, this game is great. Then you reach a certain threshold, and it's like, I can't do shit all with this. Like if you play around a little bit for a week, it looks like it has a lot of potential. After that first week of, you know, it's like, oh, well, you know, I unlocked this. It's going to take me a while to unlock Sonic the Hedgehog, but look, I got Amy Rose and Blaze from Streets of Rage, and some stuff like that. It's like, ooh, that's cool. That's cool. And then you're like, and I'm slowly unlocking more all the time. And then you realize it's getting harder to unlock stuff, because even as you level up, it's still incredibly hard to unlock the stuff that isn't the easiest to unlock. So it's screwed up. And some of the missions, some of the character-based missions that can be useful for unlocking other characters, they had like special missions for each one of the characters from Phantasy Star and Jet Set Radio and now Crazy Taxi. Those will be around for so long, and it looked like after they played, they would cycle through a second time. Then they stopped doing that. If they had kept those, that would at least be something. They added and then they added an extra campaign. They added an extra campaign other than the main campaign called the Beyondering. But you could only take special characters into the Beyondering, which, okay, that was all right. But then those characters, they took those away from being able to be used in the main campaign. So it's like, okay, so they added a new campaign, which kind of helps add something to gameplay, you know. But then they're like, oh, but they took it away from the main campaign, and now you're just... So they added something cool, but they fucked up something else in its place. Not a good idea. Now, that said, if the desperate attempt to get you to pay money to make the game playable is their goal, they should have made everything that you unlock with money a hell of a lot cheaper, because you ain't getting fuck all for your money. I just looked at it and it was like, all right, let's just say I wanted to unlock that character. How much would it take? And then you stopped and thought about it. It's like, no, that's absurd. You go out and buy a new game for a contemporary console for less than what you'd pay just to unlock a character in that game. It's nuts. It's pathetic. And one of the cats was making noises. I don't know what got the cat's attention. Cats everywhere. Cats everywhere. So that's my rant about Sega Heroes. It's whatever. It's whatever. And I ranted on about Star Trek and the most recent of the Orville. I'm just going to lean here off to the side because whatever. Because, you know, I'm standing. I should have set up the camera somewhere where I could sit down. Should have did that. But with enough caffeine, I will... went straight for the lung. One of the lungs. I think it was the left lung. You know, I wonder if caffeine could get into your system faster through your lungs. I don't know. But I'm tired. And, yeah, that's about all I can say about anything. But I strongly recommend the most recent episode of the Orville. The Orville has been good this season. It's focused more on character moments than anything. Like, the last episodes have all been very character-driven shows. And it actually felt... I mean, the episode before this one was probably more action-driven. You see more of the spaceship doing stuff in space and dealing with things. But I don't know, this episode actually felt a little more action-driven, I thought, than the two that came before it. Definitely more than the first one. But at the same time, each one of them had a lot of character moments. Bortus has played a big role thus far. Coughing and burping. My eye is itchy. My eye is itchy. So, yeah, I recommend if you can check out the Orville. I watched it on Fox the other night. And I know here, as I think outside the United States, it's licensed other places, so I never bothered going to Fox's own website to try and watch it. And last time I ever tried to, I think I had Hulu on the Xbox 360, and I tried to activate it, and they're like, well, we're not going to serve your nation. All right, well then fuck you, Hulu. So I don't know if I can get Hulu here or not, but I know that I can watch... just need a shot of nasal spray. Clear the sinuses. I know I can watch the Orville on City TV if I want to rewatch it. They have the website for City TV has the Orville. And if I want to watch Star Trek Discovery or the short treks, because I've also commented on that, can't. I can wait for it to come on DVD or wait for the next time it airs on the Space Channel, but can't. Most of the world can get it on Netflix, except the United States, where they're trying to use it to pimp CBS All Access, which nobody likes, respects, or wants. But then again, nobody likes, respects, or wants Star Trek Discovery. People just watch it because it's Star Trek, and they're kind of curious what's going to happen to Star Trek. And not good things are happening to Star Trek. There's the rumor of the Picard show, rumored to be called Star Trek Destiny. Now, saying Star Trek Destiny instead of Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Destiny, there was a book series by that name. Those were good books. They mixed elements from Star Trek Enterprise. They told the final fate of the NX-02 starship, probably my second favorite starship of all time, the NX-02. They told the final fate of that. There was some time travel with an advanced species known as the Kaliar. I think that's how it was pronounced. There was the origin of the Borg featured in the book, as well as Starfleet having a massive victory against the Borg, which may have been the Borg's final defeat. Because there was an all-out war in it. And there was... what all happened there? I remember there was one point where one of the ships... I forget if it was transwarp conduits or... Man, it's been so long since I read the book, I can't remember if it was... I think it was a transwarp conduit they used at one point. And the Enterprise E ends up fighting the Hirogen. Which was kind of interesting as like one of the little things that happened during the book. Captain Ezri Dax of the Aventine. I'm pretty sure that... man, it's been so long since I read that book. I'm thinking, wait, was that exactly what the ship was called? You know, and all that stuff. But yeah, fuck, it's been too long since I read that book. Actually, it was a series of 3 books. You can get it as one big book, but I actually read it as 3 separate books. It's been a long time since I read that book series. Well, this new show is going to have the same title. I don't think there's a hope in hell of it being as good as the books. The same people behind this are the people behind Star Trek Discovery. So, yeah. They're bringing back Picard, so hopefully they'll get it right. Probably not. I saw an interview where they were talking about how a lot of the actors involved with Star Trek Discovery thought it would be great if only Picard could be in their show. But of course, he's in it from a different time period, so, you know, he wouldn't be in Discovery unless it involved time travel. Of course, at this point, I don't think Discovery would care. You know, they could have Picard show up without using time travel even before he was born. That would be stupid, but it'll be on par with what we've seen in Star Trek Discovery. It's like some people get all bothered by, oh no, Star Trek Discovery screwed up something else. It's like, well, at this point, what difference does it make? Star Trek Discovery's so screwed up, they might as well say the warp drive runs on candy corn. What difference does it make? There's been a lot of vehicle noises today. A lot of vehicle noises. So anyway, they probably aren't showing up on the camera. Actually, there's also electric heaters going, probably lowering the audio quality of this. Lowering the audio quality of this video almost as much as me talking. Just lowering the audio quality of this. And I've been rambling on for over 80 minutes. Ugh. Over 80 minutes. Ugh. Wow. Yeah, I mean, they might as well, the Star Trek Discovery, they might as well establish the warp drive runs on candy corn. Wouldn't it be any worse? Wouldn't it be any worse? It'd just be more of the same at this point. But no, I mean, I don't know. If they hire some really good writers and listen to the writers, I mean, Les Muniz is gone, so he won't be screwing up things anymore. But everybody else involved with Discovery, it's been bad. I keep hearing vehicles. Like, one just went up the road, but I keep hearing vehicles slowing down. Nobody came in here. It would have been a little bit louder. It must be cars coming and going from... That just seemed a little too loud to be next door. I'm just distracted by that, but I'm about to end this video anyway. So many vehicle sounds today. I've been noticing that earlier today, too. So anyway, yeah, I don't think the writing quality for... Oh yeah, I was going to say though, one of the things that was interesting, they talked about how Picard, it was, I forget what article it was, but I seen it on my phone, and it said how they'd love to have Picard in their show, in Discovery, as a guest star in Discovery and stuff like that. And they made the comment, but they can't because he's in a different timeline. That could be the smartest thing they ever said. If they were to decide that Star Trek Discovery was a different timeline, that could just fix everything. But that would be an interesting thought. And I would be all for that. Star Trek Discovery being in another timeline, because that would make it easier to shoehorn into the Star Trek multiverse. But I think I'll end with that thought, that Star Trek Discovery would be best treated as a different timeline. But, oh, one of the rumors about the Picard show is that the Picard show was supposed to take place in the same timeline as Discovery, and that it would be a universe changed. That the history of, like, Enterprise would have kind of happened, but the events would be a little bit different. The original series would have happened, but the events would be a little bit different. Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager would have happened, but the events would have been a little bit different. And that something had changed the universe. And that we have a whole new Prime universe. Which means the old Prime universe would be the good one, you know. And that's another thought, that, you know, maybe the Picard story will be a story where they're going to try and put the old Prime universe behind them. Because we know that most of the people behind the current Star Trek are more likely to make money off of merchandising if they could just get people to stop buying the old Star Trek merchandise and buy their new stuff, which is 20% different. So, perhaps merchandise will have killed Star Trek. Me, I just want some more phasers and phase pistols from Enterprise of the Next Generation. Actually, the original series phasers were really well designed, like, because they had like all these little things on them that actually made sense. I mean, the phase pistol also does have like switches and a few things that could adjust it, and the phase pistol was actually really well thought out. I actually prefer the Next Generation phasers, how they have a button rather than a trigger, but I thought that was kind of cooler. But nonetheless, I always did like the phase pistols. That was kind of like a cool science fiction particle weapon design. And the original series phasers were really well thought out, with all the dials and the positioning of things on them, and the little there's like a little screen thing that pops up when you roll a little wheel on it that just kind of rises up a bit or drops down, and that the Type 1 phaser is actually built into the Type 2 phaser. Like a lot of stuff like that was pretty cool about it. The next generation phaser, I like those design a bit more than the original series. Part of it is I like how you press a thumb button rather than pull a trigger, you know. Um, but I didn't think they were very well thought through, especially when it comes to beam setting selections, because there's like two buttons. One button controls like beam destructiveness. Even saying power level with a phaser is kind of like an insufficient term because how incredibly sophisticated a phaser is compared to a mere particle beam weapon like the phase pistol. Like the phaser, like what goes on in the beam of it, in the description and the technical manuals, and even what you see on screen, is above and beyond like just power levels. The way it tears apart matter, or just disrupts a little electrical force to stun somebody. But ignoring the sophistication of it, one is like the power destructiveness level. One button controls that, but a single button, not scrolling up and down with the button exactly, but just one button to control all that. And the other button is for controlling beam width, which is something they very rarely change, probably because the special effects teams probably thought, yeah, it just looks cooler if it's just a tight beam rather than a wide beam. Or maybe for plot reasons, it's like, what, you're surrounded by enemies and you could shoot them all at once with a wide beam, everybody at the exact same moment, and just spray the room with phaser particles? Like, yeah, that solves the problem too easy. We want the person to be outgunned, and we want them to be captured at this point, you know. So I think they just kind of ignore. Plot often ignores what the phaser should be capable of doing. Yeah. Every now and then you'll see the phaser set to like a wide beam or to sweep an area, which would probably make it less effective and powerful, but you know, it would definitely be useful in a lot of circumstances. And considering the phaser would be capable of like blowing chunks off of mountains and stuff like that, if you follow like how destructive even just a hand phaser is supposed to be. As plot devices go, I can understand why the writers might try to ignore that every now and then, but still, it's a pretty interesting little science fiction concept. Basically, the beam itself contains particles called nadions, which are fictional particles, but not theoretically impossible particles. Just something we have no idea how to create anything similar to that liberates the strong nuclear force. Was it the weak? No, it was the strong nuclear force. And in doing so, well, you know what happens when you break apart the nucleus of an atom. You know, it'd be a powerful destructive effect if a lot of that was going on either in the beam or in what the beam targets. So yeah, if you can create particles like that, other than the energy necessary to create those particles, you could release even more energy at the target or in the beam itself than what you're actually using to create the beam. And while some people might think that violates the laws of physics, not necessarily. I mean, let's just say you have a match. Okay, fair enough. You know, it only provides so much energy. You need a certain amount of heat to damage something. You know, you want to melt a plastic container. And it's like, well, you got a match. It's not enough to completely melt it. Okay, but what if the plastic container is in a world full of gasoline? You know, gasoline and oxygen. Well, that match would you might only create so much energy with that match. But the environment's going to add a whole lot more, you know. It's like, how much energy do you have to put into a nuclear bomb to get the nuclear effect? You know, it's like a lot of nuclear bombs have an explosive bomb that starts, a traditional explosion that starts the process. Okay, so you put in that much explosive material as the energy that starts everything. You know, you don't really think of how much energy you had to put in there to create the uranium and put it in there. You get the weapons grade uranium and you put it in there, and then, you know, the explosive, you know, compresses the uranium or plutonium surrounded by a neutron reflector, to the point where it releases energy that's just in the matter. You're turning matter into energy. Well, the phaser beam would be starting a process that will be creating energy, releasing energy from matter. Be breaking up the nucleus of atoms. So yeah, I mean, a phaser is the description of the phaser and the technical manuals and what little has come leaked on screen is actually a weapon where you could get more power out of the effect than what you put in it at the start. So just how much energy is in the power cell wouldn't necessarily determine how effective it is. And like I said, like to some people that would seem to violate the laws of physics, and it would if it was just a laser beam or just a plasma beam or just a straightforward particle beam. But in this case, you're generating an energy that's capable of unleashing the nuclear energy that's already in the target. It's kind of like, yeah, you only create so much energy by lighting a match, but you throw that match in some gasoline and there's oxygen in the atmosphere, you get a whole lot more energy after that, So yeah, I mean, just a thought on how incredibly destructive a phaser is. Yeah, to me, it's like comparing the power cell, the phaser is like comparing the conventional explosive material in a nuclear bomb. The actual power stored in the phaser starts the process, but then when it generates plasma that goes to those special crystals, and then you start breaking apart the nucleus of atoms. Well, it's kind of like, yeah, you put so much conventional explosive in that atomic bomb, but the blast you get is going to be more than that conventional explosive, Anyway, yeah, it's just me rambling on about Star Trek stuff. Phasers. Phasers are interesting. Yeah. But anyway, I was going to end this video. Just because I think I rambled on about everything. I wanted to comment on the most recent episode of the Orville, which was a great episode. I just wanted to ramble on about the Orville in general, and of course, start with Star Trek. It's hard to talk about the Orville and not talk about Star Trek. The channel Egotastic Fun Time, which is a great channel. I recommend checking out that channel to anybody who wants to check out anybody that ever talks about the Orville, because he talks about the Orville a lot. He had like a fan theory that the Star Trek exists in the Orville as a TV show, and that'll probably turn out to be correct. They'll probably make some sort of reference to Star Trek in a vague way at some point in time. But there's so much like Star Trek, I think they're trying to be careful not to do that. That's my own fan theory, which I think his fan theory will be the one that turns out to be right. But my own fan theory, which I think is just something more fun, is to treat the Orville as a parallel universe to Star Trek. And you know what? If it turns out Zalea, or however you pronounce the Saleans' homeworld, if that turns out to be in the same location as Vulcan, that would be the. If it turns out that it's only like 16 light years from Earth, that would just be perfect. That would work perfect. As the first hint that the Saleans or Zaleans or however you pronounce it are basically an alternate universe version of Vulcan. Yeah, the planet turned out a bit different. Instead of being a hot, dry, low oxygen, but just enough oxygen wasteland of deserts and harsh environments. Instead, it was a lush, beautiful, but extra large planet with extra gravity that had, similar pointy-eared life forms evolved there, that have a thing for, intellect, and despite the fact that they don't repress their emotions, Yeah, it's an alternate universe of what happened to Vulcan. I'd be all for that. I think that'd be just great. I would like to see that. I would like to see the Orville portrayed as a parallel universe to Star Trek. I don't know the Mocklins. I mean, people would obviously associate them with the Klingons. I think it would be best if the Mocklins turned out to be the alternate universe version of the Tellarites, because they're Union members. You know what? The Krill make better Klingons than the Klingorks from Discovery. I mean, they don't look like Klingons. They have different motivations than the Klingons, but I like the Krill better than the Klingorks in Star Trek Discovery, which are the fake Klingons that Star Trek Discovery tries to pass for Klingons. Krill are awesome. Original Klingons are pretty cool too. Star Trek Discovery Klingons, not so much. I think the Star Trek Discovery Klingons should turn out to be an alternate version of the Klingons created by that alien Nazi guy from Star Trek Enterprise that Archer blew up his time travel portal. But he was in the time travel portal when it was blown up. I think he should have went to ancient Cronus, where he was trying to set up a base. And in this alternate timeline, he created the Klingorks. He genetically modified the Klingorks into being what they are. In fact, Temporal Cold War could explain a lot about Star Trek Discovery. For example, in Star Trek Enterprise, it was established that the Suliban wanted the Klingons to be fighting each other and divided so they wouldn't be a unified empire. And that seemed to fail. They seemed to fail to break up and keep the empire divided. That said, what if they succeeded? Or if it wasn't the Suliban, if somebody else had a similar goal, and they made the difference so that even when the Suliban were found out... Because one thing about Discovery also had Archer go to the Klingon homeworld. They referenced that. So that's something that did not change in the Discovery timeline. But the Klingons don't look like anything Archer ever encountered. So what if that failed though? What if what seemed to be a success in Star Trek Enterprise, which prevented the Klingons from being a divided empire, actually ended up dividing them? And then you have the Klingons, which are also altered biologically somehow, of Discovery, where the houses were divided in Discovery. It was just that Takuma guy came to power, or came up with this crazy plan to unite them with a war against the Federation. That's a thought. That was a thought. Or what if, even though they were tampering with the timeline, maybe the Suliban didn't want the Discovery timeline to happen, and the Suliban prevented the Discovery timeline from happening when their information got acquired by the... Maybe they were tampering with things in a different way, and the Klingons found them out, but they still succeeded. And, but I don't know. But there's a lot of tampering with Klingon history. I think future guy should turn out to be Braxton from Voyager. He had a hate-on for Janeway, and Janeway changed the timeline by getting Klingon technology. There was a Klingon that was messing around with time travel technology. Janeway acquired Klingon time travel technology. And Braxton had a hate-on for Voyager. Maybe he became that future guy. Maybe he traveled to a different time period, operated out of that time period, manipulating the Suliban, and wanted to mess with the Klingons and the Federation, so that the Klingons wouldn't develop that technology. I don't know. He temper things the way that he felt was better, because he was going nuts from temporal psychosis or some crazy thing like that. But he also, as much as he was willing to tamper with the timeline, he did not want Earth destroyed. He wanted Earth to survive just as much as Daniels and the temporal agents wanted Earth to survive. So all indications are that both future guy and Daniels from the Temporal Cold War, while being different factions in the Cold War, both of them had an interest in the survival of Earth, and most likely the survival of the Federation. though the Suliban were tampering with the Klingons. So maybe Future Guy was trying to make sure that Discovery didn't happen. Unfortunately, he failed, and we still get Star Trek Discovery. Maybe that could be the way. You know, CBS wants to call Discovery the prime timeline. Let them have the name. Fuck the name. The good Star Treks happen to be Star Trek Enterprise, Star Trek the original series, Star Trek the Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and just like Y is a vowel, and sometimes Voyager. You know, it's like it's like the good Star Trek was that timeline. CBS wants to screw things up and wants to call their timeline the prime timeline. Let them have the name prime timeline. Let the other timeline be known as the real timeline, or the Star Trek timeline, or the First Contact timeline. Doesn't matter. Let Discovery's timeline be the alternate prime timeline. Maybe things happen in Discovery that change the timeline, and I don't know. Something that split the timeline, and let Discovery believe they're the prime timeline. Doesn't matter. Let Baby have its bottle. Call Discovery the prime timeline. And everything else can be the Star Trek timeline, except for the Kelvin timeline, which was those incredibly stupid movies. The only one that was any good was Star Trek Beyond, and it bombed at the box office because people were fed up with how stupid the last two movies were. But it actually was a decent movie. Star Trek Beyond, I'll give them points. Star Trek Beyond was all right. Points to Star Trek Beyond for... It wasn't amazing. I'd rather watch Star Trek 4 or Star Trek Nemesis or Star Trek Generation far more than it. And, now, to me, the two I always liked the least were Star Trek V and Star Trek First Contact. Star Trek First Contact just felt... I love Star Trek First Contact because it leads up to Star Trek Enterprise, but it's, at the same time, it felt too much like just a generic action movie, while Star Trek Enterprise I absolutely loved. But for the most part, Star Trek V I felt was the flawed one, and Star Trek First Contact was the one that was just too much of a generic action movie. Now, Star Trek II, I find Star Trek II to be way overrated. It's a great movie, but also too much of it just comes off like a generic action movie, except with slow action scenes. And although there's a lot about it I love, there's a lot of philosophical things in there, it's pretty thoughtful at times. But for the most part, I don't get into Star Trek 2 nearly as much as Star Trek 1 or Star Trek 3. Definitely not as much as Star Trek 4. I love Star Trek 4. I love Star Trek 6, but Star Trek 6, Grumpy Old Men. That's a great movie. That's a truly great movie, Star Trek 6, Grumpy Old Men. Wasn't Gene Roddenberry's favorite, that's for sure. Well, at least I don't know if I'm trying to remember if he survived, if he was still alive when it came out in theaters or not. But I remember reading about his opinion of the script and what was going on in the movie before it came out, that he didn't approve of a lot of things in it. But that's beside the point. Star Trek 6, I still love that movie though. But yeah, Star Trek 4 and Star Trek Nemesis would be my favorite. I think Generations is really underrated. A lot of people focus on the lame death that Kirk had. Whatever. You did have that cool scene where the Enterprise D holds up against the Klingon bird of prey that finds a way to shoot through its shields. A lot of people complained about that scene, saying that the Enterprise was blown up way too easy. And I'm like, the Enterprise held up really well. I mean, whether it's Klingon disruptors and torpedoes that are 100 years old, or contemporary next generation equipment, you're talking about weapons that fire off at a power level capable of destroying the surface of a planet. And the Enterprise D, its shields were not holding up at all, well, weren't working at all, because the Klingons found a way to get past its shields. The Enterprise D held up amazing. We're talking about shots that could wipe out half a decently sized city, and the ship's hull was absorbing it. Yeah, it took damage. Yeah, the power spikes eventually caused the warp core to breach, and they had to separate the saucer because they couldn't properly eject the core. A lot of stuff like that happened, but the ship was taking a battering from things that really should have destroyed an unshielded ship. I think it was one comparison I saw was the Constitution class starship held up under similar attacks, fended off them even better without its shields in Star Trek 6. And it's like, Star Trek 6, its shields were down to about 20%. Its shields were still absorbing some of the blast, and it was still getting chunks of its hull blown apart from what was leaking through the shields. The Enterprise D, on the other hand, its shields were there, but they were pretty much a non-factor. Yeah. So the Enterprise D actually held up pretty well. But anyway, ooh, I got a message. And it's about time for me to end this anyway. But yeah, I like Star Trek Generations. Had a theme of life, time, fear of death, and mood and tone I really liked. So I felt Generations is underrated. But I'm going to end this, because it's about that time. Alright, so goodbye everybody. Look for my other videos. This one's a video log and a live video log, and just me talking about the media portrayed within, or the universes portrayed within media. Yay! Yeah, alright. Gonna end this. It's asking me, are you sure?